Hi all, welcome to BRR Knowledge Center. In this today's session, we'll talk about what is a contained database. We have seen so far, Azure SQL Server and Azure SQL Server installing on virtual machines and Azure SQL managed instances. But what is this contained database? So contained database is nothing but a database which is isolated from the other SQL Server instance and can be restored on any SQL Server instance. So this is basically using it for isolating of your databases and where you can connect to that contained database using database level credentials, but not from the SQL Server credentials. So if you look at the SQL Server version, 2012 version onwards, we have this contained database feature where you need to enable this option saying that enable contained databases from the SQL Server instance properties. And earlier versions of 2012, we don't have this contained databases. So if you wanted to create a contained databases in SQL Server, first step, what we need to do was we need to configure that SQL Server instance to support enabled contained database. So that option was you just configure that enabled contained databases as true so that the contained database relevant configurations are getting enabled. So once you enable that, so you need to create a database as like how you are creating a normal database using a new database or restore database. And then you need to select content type or containment type. By default, it was none. That means it's uncontained or non-contained database. And if you wanted to create the current database as a contained database, you have to specify that containment type as partial. So I'll explain how to enable the containment database in the SQL Server and then how you are going to create a containment database. So let's quickly get into this explanation part of contained databases, like what are all the other features we have to choose this contained databases and what are all the other limitations we have like on top of this contained databases, because this containment database or contained database basically using it for isolated of your databases, that's fine, but there are a bit limitations as well we have with this containment databases. So thing was the beauty of containment database was isolating of databases, and also you can directly connect to the databases using database level credentials. Okay, let me quickly get into this explanation bit. So, and then we'll see the demonstration part in coming sessions. Okay, let me share my notepad. Just opening my notepad. Just changing my font. So, topic was contained databases. Okay, so as I told, this was using it for isolating from other databases and from the instance of SQL Server that host in the databases, right? So this SQL Server helps user to isolate their databases from the instances. Now, if you can look at the kind of benefits with this, first thing was isolated from other databases, right? If you have multiple databases on your SQL Server instance, this contained database was isolating from the existing databases. Second thing was isolated from SQL Server instance. Isolated from databases and isolated from the instance. That is another feature of this containment database. And third one is no login needed. Okay, so applications can directly access the database independent of the SQL Server instance information. So SQL Server needs to be configured before you can create a contained database, as mentioned in the starting of our this video session. So database needs to be configured to be contained database, and then you have to create a contained database. So with that contained database, you will have these kind of benefits: isolated from other databases, isolated from SQL Server instance, and no login needed for the contained databases. So contained database is not fully featured DB because it's partial, because it doesn't have a SQL Server instance principles as like a normal instance of a DB contained non-contained databases. So this contained database does not share anything. It is always can be found in contained DB. It doesn't have login, and if any DB have a login, then it is fully covered features, right? A fully contained database includes all the settings and metadata required to define the databases, and has no configuration dependencies on the instance of SQL Server databases. So the benefits, what I'm trying to tell about is, none of the more problems that occurs when moving a databases. So some important information can be unavailable when database is moved from one instance to another instance. For example, login information is stored within the instance instead of in the database, right? So when you move a database from one instance to another instance, or like when you move a non-contained database from one instance to another instance of SQL Server, this login information is left behind because we are just moving a database, but not the users from the SQL Server instance, right? So we must specify or identify the missing information and move it with your database to the new instance of SQL Server in this case. This process can be difficult and time consuming. So this problem is not going to occur for the contained database where we don't have any dependency with the credentials of SQL Server instance. So whatever user you are creating during the creation of contained database, that information will automatically coming as part of this contained database when you move from one SQL Server instance to another SQL Server. So the limitations which we have with this was a couple of things. One is a partially contained databases do not allow the kind of features. One is a replication. So replication sometimes not possible. Allows at the same time change data capture and also change tracking. Okay. And the second limitation we'll talk about was numbered procedures. So this is another limitation. And third thing was, so binding change resulting from collection changes. So when you convert the existing non-contained database to contained databases, so you may get a problem with the collection changes, because when you're creating a database or SQL Server will have a default collection, but when you make the change to contain database, so you may get collection changes, including a reference of object and columns and symbols or types. So I can say a binding change resulting default collection issues. Default collection changes. Okay, like so including references to objects, columns, symbols, or types, right? So collection changes may get affected when you create or convert existing non-contained database to a containment database. So this contained databases uses or users that are configured directly at the database level and don't require an association login in the master database. The benefit of this approach is that it makes your database more portable and also simplifies the database. So this is what the contained database, and we'll see like how to create a contained database and how to log into the contained databases to with the database level credentials instead of SQL Server credentials, and see like how we can access only the contained databases, database objects other than other existing databases. Because as I said, one benefit was isolating from other databases. Even you have a multiple database in your SQL Server instance, so you will not see all other databases because it's completely isolating. So when you log in with your contained database login, you will see only contained database, not other databases, right? So this is something about the introduction part of contained database, and I will see the demonstration part in the next video. So thanks for listening to this video, and Please subscribe this channel for more videos. Thank you.